Hi everybody, here's a quick video on how to restore the dials on a Zenith Robot Dial or Shutter Dial as they're called. This method works for all models including the 15 tubers, which they will have an extra dial sheet, but that's just an extra step if you're working on one of those. The first things that you're going to do is take your dial apart. There's several guides online how to do that, but the main part of my video is how to apply the decals, which you can get those from a company called Radio Days, and I can provide the link in the description on how to get those. It's about $100 for the set. It's really your only option if your dials are in bad shape, but of course these radios are worth quite a bit of money, and you know, it should turn out really nicely if you follow this guide, and you know, it's well worth it in the end. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, take it apart, and then you're going to want to sand them down and paint them. And that's up to you how you want to do that. You can use spray can paint, Rust-Oleum, and just make sure it's nice and smooth and good looking. Or you could do it with car paint, which is what we did. This is just regular car black paint, and it's also clear coated, so it gives it a nice kind of glossy or shiny finish. The originals were a bit more of a matte finish, but I kind of like the shinier finish a little bit better. It kind of goes better with a nice refinished cabinet, and if you're going to polish out the bezel too, everything just looks better. It's just more, I guess, vibrant looking, I guess. It's really up to you how you want to do that, but this video is really about the decals. So starting off, you want to identify which dial you have. So if you look at my video right here, actually what I'm doing right here is showing you what a finished product will look like. Then we'll pan back over to the dial we're working on. That chassis right there is my 266. What we're working on here is a 265, so this is our second go around on this. If you look at the dial sheet on the arm part that actually switches the shutters open and close, there's a part number, and if you look on the decal that you get from Radio Days, that same part number will be there. So you're going to want to make sure that you put the right numbers on the right decal. I mean on the right dial, because otherwise they will not fit and they won't match what the band switches in the radio. So what you want to do is trace them out with some sort of marker. We're using a red Sharpie here. It really doesn't matter what you use, as long as you can see the line and you can cut it out. So we'll finish doing that right here. Then you'll want to cut that out. And because the bottom part of the round part of the dial cuts off that one area, you're going to want to fill that in manually because you can't trace through there. So you just use some nice scissors and cut them out. You can just cut it in half initially and then trim them down. You can even do it with a razor blade if you like. Just as long as you get the general curved shape of the dial, you should be good. Oh, and to start off, you're going to want to make sure, if you see that bowl in the background, that's filled with warm water. It has to be warm water because that helps to separate the dial from the paper when you set it in the water, and you'll see how that works later on. And that little red bottle right there is a product called Microsol. You're going to want to have that also. There's also other solutions made by that company called Microscale, but I've only used the Microsol, and that's the only one that I know how to use and know what it does. And I'll show what that's for later. And you're also going to need some small brushes, like some real small artist brushes. Some that are thin, some that are thick, some that are stiff, some that are loose. They're all, you're going to need all different types once you get into it. Okay, so see here, we're wiping off all the dust because once you put the decal on, any dust or lint or whatever is underneath there will be trapped under there. you want to make sure the thing's spotless. You're going to get your brush, and you need to wet down the curved dial area so that when you apply your decal, it doesn't stick to it because it's dry. You want it to kind of float around. They're called water slide decals. We want to slide them off, and it takes some time to get them set exactly where you want them. So that's where the slide part of water slide decals comes in. So you can see my dad just went ahead and placed the decal into the water. You can see the decal is kind of floating off the paper. You don't want to let it float completely off because it'll wrinkle over itself and ruin it. Okay, so you're going to slide it over to where you're about where you want it to be. And here's the tricky part. There's really no way to explain this, but if you just kind of watch the video, you can see what the procedure is. You want to slightly move the top layer off of the blue piece of paper until you can get a little bit of grip on the piece of paper, and you should be able to pull it right off while holding the dial markings behind. And you do not want that thing to wrinkle, because if it does, you'll see it. You'll see it once it's done. But if you do, I will show you later in the video how to get rid of wrinkles and folds and that kind of thing. Okay, so there we go. We see that the numbering is separated from the paper. And you can see that the numbers aren't exactly on there where you want them, so you want to slide them around very gently. They will break. They're real super thin. You're going to be super gentle with them. So once you get it about where you think you want it, you just got to let it sit. If you want to, you can take a brush and tighten the thing up and get rid of all the wrinkles, but that's up to you. You really don't see them when they're behind the dial glass, but now that you have an opportunity to work with them, it's good to just make them as best as you can. So you're going to want to wet your brush as well, so that way it doesn't tear the fabric, the film. So you can brush from the center outward, and that will pull the wrinkles out of it. It's basically just stretching it from the center, making it as flat as possible. And don't worry about water spots, we'll take care of that later. And every time you reapply a decal, you want to make sure your water is still warm. And if that means replacing it each time, it's a good idea to go ahead and do that. So just keep on brushing until you're satisfied with the way it looks. Make sure there's no folds, there's no wrinkles anywhere. So you can see that looks pretty good. Alright, now we're going to do the next side. Now what's important about doing both sides is that once you get your second dial scale on there, you're going to want to make sure that the lines that go around the circle area, that they line up. They line up fairly closely at the bottom, because when the dials go together, those two ends will be buttoned up right against another, and you can see, you will see if they're slightly off. If you look closely on my 266 Zenith, the foreign band are slightly off. We didn't quite pay good enough attention to that, because when you're putting them on, you can see that you have the shutters open. You wouldn't know that they might be off unless you place them back together again like they were closed, simulating that they're together. So you're going to want to check that periodically as you're adjusting your second decal. And so you can use your fingers to stretch the thing around. It's the same procedure as before. Not really much more to say here, but you just want to make sure that you get it as good a looking as you can. So there we go, demonstrating. You can see that the bottom one is slightly too low, and then we are moving it back up to where it should be. And you will notice that where it says foreign and where it says broadcast in the bottom, the spacing is off. That's really how it was from the factory. You would think that the spacing between fore and the edge, and then the edge to broadcast would be the same. For some reason, they're not. That's the way I've even seen some originals that were like that. So that's not a big deal if that spacing is off. And so there we are, just wiping away the wrinkles, just stretching them out from the center. You see there was a slight fold there. My dad lifted up that fold with the brush and then set it back down. There he is again. Because when there's a fold and they're completely dry, you will see the double thickness of the film, and it's a slightly wider, chalkier color, and that can be kind of irritating if you're a perfectionist when it comes to this kind of thing. It's not very noticeable, but it is there. And you want to make sure that there aren't any folds in the film where there are numbers or letters, because that will also be very obvious. And if there are, I believe later on the video that actually does happen to us on one of the edges, and you'll see how to fix that. So there we go. You can see that the foreign broadcast lines line up pretty good, and that's how you do the foreign broadcast shutter. So you're just finishing up, getting rid of those wrinkles. You can't really see them in the video, but if you're doing it for yourself, you can just kind of hold it up to the light and let the light catch the fold, and you'll see that there's a fold there, and you can just stretch it out using the brush. But keep in mind that every time that you stretch a wrinkle out, it might compress another area, so you want to just keep working with it until it's perfect. And there's that one. And you can see there's some excess film. You can slice that off later with a razor blade, or you can melt it away with the microsol solution. It's a solvent that's designed to melt that film. So basically what it's for is if you have a wrinkle or something, you can place it over that wrinkle and it'll melt that film away, but it won't damage the ink. So you could really cover the whole thing in the microsol and it will get rid of the entire film everywhere, but just leave the numbers behind. So here's how we do the outer piece. This is the most difficult one to do. Actually, going back to the foreign broadcast one, the procedure for the AM or standard broadcast shutter is the exact same procedure. You just got to make sure that the dial scales match with what piece you're putting them on, because even though they look similar, they're slightly different with the way that they place on, because of little spacers on the edges of the arms. So you want to make sure that they're on the right ones. So here we're showing what to do for the split second thing, which is the 0 to 60 for the outside brass pointer. You're going to want to cut it in half, either above or below the 15 and 45 on the sheet, so you can see that. It doesn't matter if it's above or below the 15 or 45, but you don't want to cut through it. You want to be able to realign the lines that are above and below it, and doing it in halves like that is a lot easier than having to manage a giant disc of even thinner than paper material. Even doing a half sheet like that is still fairly difficult. So you want to cut along that black line right there and remove the instructions. They give brief instructions on how to do that, but they don't have any video guides or a picture guide on how to do this, and that's why I decided to make this video. So cut that away. Yeah, there's microsol again. That's what we'll use later on to blend that in. So if you notice that when you put the split second markings on, that it's not entirely on a flat piece of metal, it actually slightly bends into the curvature of the metal. If your dials are still in good shape, you can see that, and if they're completely rusted, then You might be able to look at a picture online about what they're supposed to look like, but they do curve slightly in. And so when you're curving that material that's originally flat like a piece of paper, it's going to have areas that don't want to lay down completely onto the metal. So that's what the microsaw does. It softens it up, and you can kind of melt it to the curvature of the metal. You may even have to slice it in certain places with a razor blade. I did have to do that on that radio. My 266, for some reason, I didn't. It seemed to lay down alright, but on this radio, I guess it might have been just a slightly different brand of water slide paper that Radio Days used to print this, but it did require slicing at certain places to get it to fit. So here you'll see how it's laid out. You can either do the top or the bottom first. It's up to you. I would advise doing whichever one has the 45 and 15 on it, because you want to align those, line them up with the center hole of the dial. So if you have your 45 and 15 on the section that goes on the bottom, you're going to want to use that. So that concludes the first video. There will be either another 2 or another 3 videos in this series, because this is a lot of footage. It'd take forever to upload one complete video. But stay tuned for the next video, and I'll see you there. Thank you.